Good morning and welcome to the first session of our four-part Data Science Career Seminar Series, Bringing Data Science to Addiction Research. My name is Susan Wright. I'm from the Division of Neuroscience and Behavior, or DNB, and I'm the Program Officer for Big Data and Computational Science. I'm leading our data science efforts here at NIDA. Training in data science is a priority for NIDA, and it's supported by our new Office of Research Training, Diversity and Disparities, or ORTDD. Organizers of this seminar series include myself, Dr. Roger Little, the Deputy Director of the Division of Neuroscience and Behavior, Dr. Wilson Compton, the NIDA Deputy Director and Acting Director of the Office of Research Training, Diversity and Disparities, Dr. Albert Avila, the Deputy Director of the Office of Research Training, Diversity and Disparities, and the Director of the Office of Disparities and Health Disparities, and Dr. Lindsay Friend, the Research and Career Development Program Officer in the Office of Research Training, Diversity and Disparities. I want to Wilson, Albert, and Lindsay for their help with organizing the seminar series. And I also want to thank the team who has been helping with the technical details. And that includes Usha Charya, Susan Holbrook, Caitlin Dudebois, and David Maza. This first session is in the format of a fireside chat, and there will also be time for questions from the audience. Please use the chat box to submit your questions. And after the fireside chat concludes, we'll get to as many questions from the chat box as we can. We've organized the seminar series to feature exciting talks from both data science industry leaders and NIDA-funded scientists who are incorporating data science into their research. You'll hear more about the upcoming sessions later, but by organizing the seminar series that way, we aim to generate some interesting discussion about how we can further our efforts to bring data science to addiction research, and hopefully will inspire a new generation of data scientists focused on addiction research. Throughout the series, you'll hear about a variety of interesting data science careers and learn about the different paths the speakers took to get there, the skills needed, etc. I'm very excited to talk to you about this morning's fireside chat with Dr. DJ Patil. Before we get started, our NIDA director, Dr. Nora Volkov, will make some opening remarks. Nora has been the director of NIDA for 18 years and is a stalwart advocate of data science. Please join me in welcoming her this morning.
Susan, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I wish we were, I always say this, but it would be so fantastic when we finally see each other. But I do want to thank Dr. Wright for her leadership on the data science. And I think it is one of the most exciting areas that we've seen develop and actually starting to understand the enormous power that having data gives us for almost everything. And yet at the challenge of taking advantage of it is to generate, on the one hand, the databases that have the quality that will enable us to inquire into them on the one hand, but the other one, the scientists trained to take advantage of it. And this whereupon this seminar series becomes so very important. It opens up a space for us as a dialogue for understand the complexities and the challenges that we face, but also to get a view into a world that in many instances we didn't even realize it existed. On my side as a scientist coming from brain imaging, what I can tell you from what data science has done, it has basically revolutionized anything that we've ever thought would have been possible or happen. And it just exploits, on the one hand, the ability to get at complexity by obtaining sufficiently large data sets that allow us to see associations and relationships that otherwise would be impossible to discern. I think that there are still major gaps that we need to build, all of us. I mean, obviously from the science of analytics, modeling, mathematics, prediction, but two, from the big task of trying to understand how to integrate diverse set of data. And that is an area that I think we're going to be seeing major advances in the next few years, but we're still just at the beginning. It's extraordinarily exciting, and I am glad to be part of this, and I'm glad that we have such a strong advocate in Dr. Wright. And I also want to thank Dr. Little, Dr. Wilson, Compton, and Dr. Avila for all of their efforts to make these seminars possible. So I look forward to today's talk and chat. And I think that it's wonderful to have Dr. Patil in this morning. So Dr. Wright, I return the phone back to you.
Thank you, Nora. So now I'm very excited to introduce our special guest today, Dr. DJ Patil. Dr. Patil has held a variety of roles in academia, industry, and government. He is CTO for Devoted Health and just recently announced that he is stepping back from operational duties and has joined the board. He's also a senior fellow at the Belfer Center at the Harvard Kennedy School and an advisor to Venrock Partners. Dr. Patil was appointed by President Obama to be the first US chief data scientist, where his efforts led to the establishment of nearly 40 chief data officer roles across the federal government. He also established new healthcare programs, including the Precision Medicine Initiative and the Cancer Moonshot, new criminal justice reforms, including the Data-Driven Justice and Police Data Initiatives that cover more than 94 million Americans, as well as leading the national data efforts. He has also been active in national security, and for his efforts was awarded by Secretary Carter the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service, which is the highest honor the department bestows on a civilian. In industry, he led the product teams at Relate IQ, which was acquired by Salesforce, was founding board member for Crisis Text Line, which works to use new technologies to provide on-demand mental and crisis support, and was a member of venture firm Greylock Partners. He was also chief scientist, chief security officer, and head of analytics and data product teams at the LinkedIn Corporation, where he co-coined the term data scientist. He has also held a number of roles at Skype, PayPal, and eBay. As a member of faculty at the University of Maryland, his research focused on nonlinear dynamics and chaos theory, and he helped start a major research initiative on numerical weather prediction. As a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow for the Department of Defense, Dr. Patil directed new efforts to leverage social network analysis and the melding of computational and social sciences to anticipate emerging threats to the US. He has also co-chaired a major review of US efforts to prevent bioweapons proliferation in Central Asia and co-founded the Iraqi Virtual Science Library, or the IBSL. In 2014, he was selected by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader and is a member of the Council for Foreign Relations. And according to him, he barely graduated from high school because of his math grades. Please join me in welcoming Dr. DJ Patil. And before we get started, Nora, would you like to ask Dr. Patil any questions?
No, I'm fine. Let's start.
Okay. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Wilson to ask the first question.
Thanks and good morning. It's really a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Patil. And just to get us started, you mentioned that you didn't do very well in math during primary education. So what did you want to do when you were growing up? And were there any clues in your childhood or in your education that might make us think that you were destined to be a data scientist?
Yeah, well, first, everyone should just call me DJ, please. And apologies that we can't also be together, because this would have been one of those great excuses to be back on campus at NIH. And I really miss spending time up there. When I was in federal service again, last time around, I got to spend a lot of time at NIH, and it was one of the great joys. So I just really miss being up there in person with all of you. You know, for me, it's actually, I'm just a few miles from where I grew up in Cupertino, California, which is right down the street from where Apple was starting. And so I got to spend a lot of time playing on computers. And one of those things for some remember is, like, you know, in those early days, some of the things that you could do with computers, one of them was fractals. And there was these Mandelbrot generator functions, and they just create these beautiful pictures, and you zoom in, and these ideas just fascinated me. And I really spent a lot of time trying to understand these ideas. And at that time, you know, chaos theory was becoming a thing, but I just didn't have the math skills. And I just really was deeply excited by neuroscience and the brain and these early ideas of plasticity and all of this stuff. But I just, you know, I was growing up in an educational system where it just didn't work for me, honestly. And so while I was super interested in coding and playing with data and trying to just figure out things on the computer, I just didn't have the backing or the training. And so I actually went to community college first. I didn't get into a traditional university. And so I went to one of our wonderful community colleges, De Anza College, which is on par with Montgomery Community College near NIH. And I took a calculus class because my girlfriend was taking a calculus class. And so I was in this thing and I was like, wow, I don't know, understand, why did always the things end with DX? And I just fell in love with the whole concept of calculus. And then from then on, it was just off to the races. But I think the real credit for me learning to love math rests with community college, honestly.
Well, that's an important bit of background. You know, our goal is to inspire people in training to tackle things that they may be interested in, but may not be comfortable or be confident that they can figure out. And I love that idea that you found some local resources to really help you overcome that barrier.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think, you know, if anything, y'all have been on the cutting edge of, and I think the rest of the countries, we had this a long time ago, and we've kind of forgotten it, which is, what does it really look like to build the infrastructure at a community level to support things? And what does that really mean to have high quality interactions, support layers, and all of that information also be distilled in a way that the sum of the parts gets to be put back together in a way that benefits everybody. And how do you bring it together? How do you disseminate it? All of those different aspects. And that's something that we know intrinsically, but I would argue, you know, over at least definitely over our federal budgets and our different aspects at the state level and the county and city levels, we've really lost a lot of that. And one of the things I think, which maybe sound a little contrary, is while we have the superpower of the internet and a lot of these technologies, I'm actually more in favor of the local human connections rather than just abject scaling of technologies and saying, look, we're just going to build this into an app. I think the apps are really powerful and supportive, but it's not a replacement for the infrastructure that really needs to happen at that local level. We should fundamentally be using technology to build superpowers, to augment the direct human interactions. And so it's one of the reasons, like even in healthcare, I'm not in favor of just some AI system replacing a physician. I don't think that's the value. An AI system doesn't replace somebody holding a person's hand in crisis or being able to see or ask one additional question that gives an insight. Can it help spur a conversation? Can it help give us additional insights? Yes, but it's not a replacement tool.
Certainly that resonates for me, and I appreciate that philosophical approach of in some ways reminding us that the technology is a support, not a replacement for our brains and our human connections. Thank you. Roger, I think you're up.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, DJ. Thank you for being with us. I'd like to ask you to expand a little bit on, you've talked about community college and how important it was to you, and I thank you for bringing that up. Could you talk a little bit more about other points along your career path that were important, and maybe if you were giving advice to someone coming along early in their career, maybe things to avoid or things to seek out?
Yeah, you know, the thing that I think, there's a few things that I see as commonalities, and I think I was grateful. You know, I did my doctorate at the at University of Maryland, and one of the most fantastic things there is it was so interdisciplinary. I was part of the math department, but part of a program that was truly interdisciplinary. So in our PhD program, we have to have 3 qualifiers, and one of my qualifiers was in physical oceanography, specifically El Nino and Southern Oscillation. And it was, you were forced to get out of your comfort zone. You're forced to get out into other disciplines. And because of that, I think one of the reasons I think that I really it worked for me in the traditional programs weren't filling this need, is what do you do for people of us that are in the intersection of things? For those who remember, and many people started their careers much later, was, you know, that point of time around right when the Human Genome Project was going, there was this whole thing of like, well, what do you do if you kind of sit in the intersection? If you're working on some sequencing algorithm where you're a computer scientist, but you're not a geneticist, or you're sort of in this both, but you're also both. Like, where do you fit, and how do you apply for funding if you're sitting in these things? You know, you can't get, if you're an academic, a true traditional academic, you can't get tenure in either department because they're like, you don't fit. You're not one of us. And then I think what we started to see is some of these more industry programs started to move was people are like, well, what does this mean to be interdisciplinary? What does it mean to be multidisciplinary? And I think the power of data science is it's not supposed to fit. It's supposed to actually kind of cut across, and it gives flexibility. And maybe this is a very long-winded way of answering your question, but maybe just kind of frame this is, why did we come up with the term data scientist? And I think the story is actually helpful. So we didn't have this like massive grand plan of like, we're going to go name a new field, and then one day there's going to be degrees, and you know, it's going to be amazing, and there'll be a chief data scientist. That was not the plan. The plan literally was, how do we get HR off our backs? And so LinkedIn and both Facebook were heading towards the IPO. Jeff Hammerbacher and I would used to get together and have lunch every so often and just compare notes. And some people may find that strange, like are LinkedIn and Facebook competitors, but we'd share technology. It's no different than like what if we're researchers, right? We're more water in the harbor floats all boats kind of argument. And as we're trading ideas, one of the things that came up is I said, hey, you know what are you starting to call yourselves? Because we have this problem, like HR came to us and said, look, you've got, you know, all these titles like business analyst, data scientist, statistician, all these things. Like the engineers, they're engineers. Sales is sales. Designers. What are y'all? And we're like, I don't know. And so we compared notes, and literally we kind of went through all of them. And we're like, well, like which one? Like analyst sounded too business oriented, to Wall Street. You know, statistician was going to piss off the economists, and economists were going to piss off the statistician. So we're like, we don't want that war. And then we just kind of went through, and at the end we were like, well, data scientist seems to be the one that kind of gravitated. But because we were LinkedIn, we actually posted all of our job applications just for the LinkedIn corporation using the term data scientist, and all the others as well. And we saw which ones people would apply to and who we hired. And almost everyone came through the data science pipeline. And which is a little surprising, because we were like, data scientist, isn't that like repetitive? Isn't that like why would we want to call ourselves that? But we literally data science our way into it. And the reason I think it's taken off is honestly because I don't think people know what the hell it means. And think about that for a second, is if you go into a meeting, especially in industry, if you go into a meeting and somebody, there's like a big sort of proverbial table and everyone's there and someone says, so which group are you with? And you're like, they're like, oh, I'm with business analysis or something. And they're like, why are you in this meeting? Or if you're a statistician, like, why are you here? This is the meeting for the real meeting. But if you're the data scientist, everyone's like, oh, good, we need some smart people around this room. And it's because it has this ambiguity, and because it allows it to touch all these things, that allows you to be in meetings where you're able to get context. And when you have that context, you now can use your skills. So how does this come back to your question is the training, I think, that is most essential fundamentally is a couple things. One, it's passion and curiosity. It's actually, honestly, it's not data. It's kind of like 101 for all of us and like how we got into our fields. Passion and curiosity. Then it's like, how do you exercise that passion and curiosity? It's through the use of computational and technical means, some of which is statistics, some of which is computational, but a lot of it, honestly, is being able to be clever to go find a data set or a way to use a data set so that, or bring multiple data sets together in a way that somebody said, I didn't think that we could actually do that. That's weird. Or what if we brought this data in? Or what if we go and found a way to get this other insight? Because otherwise we're always looking for something pristine as data. And by the time we collect it, it's too expensive and time is taken too long. And so those pieces, like, where can you get those skills? Well, do you have to have a PhD? I don't think so, personally. I've met lots of people who don't have PhDs or even collegiate degrees who are phenomenal at data. But what they have found in their ability to do is they've found different projects, different mentors from lots of different areas where they're able to kind of cut across and be this crucible for ideas or this instigator for conversations on the team that allow us to kind of go, well, what if we did this? How about if we brought this together? Or, well, what if we just use this computational technique? Or what if we use these new graphic processing units, the GPUs, to do this instead of something else? That's the training. That's the issue, the place where you get that. And so I think we're starting to get formalized training, but I don't think you really, even in the formalized training, what I tell people is like, go get multiple hats, get the multiple hats, and then you will be hyper effective.
Thank you very much. What you just said actually encapsulates one of the reasons we're having these series of talks, is because we recognize that maybe much of our future data science workforce in neurobiology right now is sitting in a place where they don't recognize themselves as being able to do that kind of work. And so we truly do see the role of the data scientist in addiction research as someone who is transdisciplinary and brings multiple perspectives and non-traditional research skills to these problems. So thank you for those comments.
Roger, if I had one ask of every data scientist, and this is definitely true at the actually every level, very true at the federal level, was get out of our proverbial offices. When we can meet again in person and do other things, get out of your office and go have coffee or lunch with other people. One of the ones that we used to set up, and there's no reason the chief data scientist office ran this, but it doesn't have to be that way, is every Tuesday there used to be a meeting at noon where anybody could dial in or come down to GSA and hang out with other data scientists and share what they were doing. And if you can just hang out and share and do stuff. We used to have a rule, and the teams that work together, you can't be more than 4 feet. Your desk had to be 4 feet from somebody else's. And the reason is we're just trying to collaborate and pass information back and forth. And some of the most amazing ideas that were off the wall, harebrained, kind of came from those processes where you're just like, wow, I never thought about using that. Well, what if we did that? What about those kind of ideas? And I think we've all experienced some version of that, especially those that have gone to grad school and were kind of in like the crappy like labs or environments where your desks were kind of forced together, and you were just like, you learned through kind of looking over someone's shoulder or somebody asking a question. The place, and one of the discerning things that I can almost always tell that goes wrong. There's two things that I would tell people, at least with interviewing people or watching people kind of get slotted into roles as predictors. One is if I'm interviewing you, and the easiest question I ask is, great, here's a data set. What would you be interested in? Like if this was LinkedIn, I'd say, hey, great, here's all of LinkedIn's data. You have it. What's the first question that you're interested in? And then what's the second question? And usually what people who are really have nailed this are that in the 90 seconds, they have come up with like 15 hypotheses they would like to test. They're just like, oh, I'd have this. If you had like suppose you had fMRI data, fMRI data of every scan over the past 20 years. What would you do with that data? And if you're kind of like, takes you more than 10 seconds, like what would it take for you to come up with like faster answers, all those things, because you want all that. The second is I ask people like, how do you go about, what's your model for actually working on a problem? And if your first inclination isn't to ask somebody else, then that's the reframing. It needs to be ask somebody else, because everybody can do deep research. And I don't want to say to anybody out there, like, don't do deep research. Don't be like doing the deep scholarly work or investigation. But what I really want to emphasize is efficiency of work. And so a lot of times, instead of just going and, you know, sitting in the library and doing this stuff, first ask around if anybody else has done this, if anybody else has ideas, and then use that as your mechanism into the project so that you're scalable, you're more efficient at getting to the problem. Because otherwise there's too many dead ends, and computationally that chews up way too much dollars and time as you lay code down.
Thank you. Albert, I believe you're up next.
Hi, DJ. Thanks for that. So I have a sort of a two-parter question. You kind of addressed the first one, but we still want to kind of ask it. So what attracted you to, data science? What attracted you to, chief of data science? But also, can you unpack a little bit? You touched upon this, like data science, that word is sort of getting trendy, but a lot of young people who are watching you now, or may watch this video later after they wake up on the West, they don't really know what data science is. We're talking about it like everybody understands it. So can you talk from a little bit more of a practical standpoint? So what attracted you into it, but unpack a little bit more of what that means to analyze data sets. What does that mean to be a data scientist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. The first is what is the idea of data science? I think it is fundamentally, how do we use data to gain insights, or how do we use data in a way to build something? So one of the things that I think is there is that is the most interesting aspect of this nowadays, is that we're using data actually to make products. So an easy one to think of is like, okay, if you go to a social media site like LinkedIn or something else, and you kind of build out your profile, it can tell you like, hey, here's interesting jobs. There's job recommenders. That's a data product. If you go look on an e-commerce site and it says people who bought this also bought this, that's a data product. But another data product is a self-driving car. Autonomous vehicles are a data product because it takes in all of this information, it processes it, and it makes decisions. But also those are data products that could help somebody else make a decision. I think of a data product, if you're looking at something of a brain scan or something, and it highlights interesting areas for you to look at from a diagnostic perspective or something else, that's a data product. How does that actual, the tangible experience of, looking at something, being able to do something, and how do you make a decision out of it? How does it change a course direction? One of the data products that we see every day that we often don't give a lot of credence to or thought into is our weather forecast. And this is one of the important things, is these data products oftentimes don't have to give you a lot of data back. They can give you just a little icon, like today, is it like, hey, there's a sun and it's like really nice and happy. And it's like, oh, wow, okay, that's like, I don't need to take the umbrella, or there's like a dark and stormy cloud. You don't need the detailed data. Now, if you're a pilot, maybe you need a different data product because you need different levels of sophistication. And so who builds that? Who makes that come alive? That's the data scientist. The data scientist is the person who actually is the person who says, hey, what if we brought these things together and kind of did it? And maybe this is helpful to tell the story of people you may know. This is this idea that I think that we've all seen on social media things. This is this kind of like, you go on a thing and you sign up and it's like, hey, did you know these are the other people that are actually here? So the story of that actually is actually another person who grew up in Bethesda, Jonathan Goldman. And Jonathan had this idea. He's a theoretical physicist, and he was data scientist at LinkedIn, early person there. And, he went around and he said, hey, when people sign up for LinkedIn, how are people supposed to know who to connect to? And everyone said, oh, they'll just upload their address book and then we'll tell them. And it's that's, if you just show up to the site for the first time, you really want to give up your whole address book? That's a lot to ask for. And, the product teams said, okay, Jonathan, you and your harebrained ideas, whatever. And so Jonathan, being a good data scientist, he didn't just kind of say, okay. What he did is he went and actually got access to all the LinkedIn information. And then he built a bunch of ads, like literal ads that would go on your page when you first logged in. And they just used a set of very simple heuristics. Triangle closing. If I know Susan and Albert, you know Susan, maybe there's a chance we know each other. It's like triangle closing. Then, oh, did you overlap in jobs? Did you overlap in schools? And where do you get those questions from? It's the same questions we ask if we were running into each other at a barbecue. So how did you get here? Who do you know here? These are the things. We're just sort of heuristics, no AI, nothing fancy. And then he put them up, he just kind of gave these as a static ad, nothing sophisticated. And then the next morning, everyone was like, what is going on the site? That we've never seen this kind of engagement or activity. And people were like, this is crazy. And we were like, what happened? And then finally I was like, did Jonathan do something? Jonathan's like, I just put this experiment out there. And everyone's like, this is amazing. And what happened is after that is the entire social networking landscape, all the companies realized oh my gosh, this is the answer. This is the thing. And so every company then raced to actually implement this. And then of course they became very sophisticated algorithms and other things. But the point I'm trying to make is one data scientist with an idea changed the trajectory of the whole industry. And we've seen that time and time again. And that's that person with data science. Now, there's a similar version of a data scientist who comes up with that remarkable insight that says, something like akin to, if sticking on the social media kind of subject, is this kind of idea of if you get X number of people to, connect, the probability of sticking around goes up dramatically. Version of this is on Netflix is, if a person actually, checks 5 movies or shows that they're interested in watching, the retention is going to increase. And those insights have been extraordinarily powerful. And I also, in many cases, I do need to highlight, many of those have been abused also. And that is one of the reckonings that we're having to do on social media right now. There's a flip version of this for crisis text line that we've seen that our data scientists figured out, which is because we do a lot of natural language processing on top of the text messaging and the corpus, what they realize that if in your first set of conversations with a person, and you're texting back with a counselor, and you use the word any pharmaceutical, you use any pharmaceutical or Tylenol or anything, you were 8 times more likely to have actually taken the pharmaceutical already. You have already OD'd. If you say the word, I mean, it might be actually, that one might be even 16 times. I can't remember exactly. But then if you use the word, if you say that you have a gun or you're in the military, we know that you're X more times more likely to actually have that gun locked and ready next to you. So what do we do with that? We go, oh, wow. Now we have to change the way we prioritize the queue. So that we say, all right, we need to escalate this right now and take different action. And we highlight that to the counselor saying, this is higher risk. And so that data scientist who's come up with that novel insight has changed the paradigm of those things. What does it take to get there is playing. A lot of play with the data and kind of going, what if? What about this? What about this? But when you have that nugget, all of a sudden it's like, ooh, that's really interesting. And we know this all the time in science because we see a clever experiment and we're like, dang, that was clever. What a way to get an insight onto that. The one that always strikes me is the early early ones on plasticity, where the experiments were done on phantom limb phenomena with motorcyclists who had an accident and then had they still had their arm, but the nerves had been ripped out effectively from the spinal column, and then they still have phantom limb, but and how that mapping, itching on their forehead would alleviate the phantom limb itch. Like these kind of things, those kind of insights is what we're trying to go for. And so the way I try to emphasize this a lot of times is in the early work is saying the phrase clever beats smart 9 times out of 10. Now, smart is what we want to apply when we're trying to scale something. Because of that first initial, let's start figuring out what the problem is. Great, like the people who know algorithm, that's clever. Is that going to scale? No way. Now we need to bring the heavy machinery in place. And depending on what kind of data scientist you want to be, maybe you're a little bit more on the insight side. Maybe you're a little bit more on the data scientist that wants to build something. Maybe you kind of float in between. And now we're starting to see this emergence of people who are much more data engineering. They move data around. They build the infrastructure to help things happen, like these event-based processing queues, the other different pieces. All of that, I start thinking is starting to become the place where things are actually moving to in this more specialization. And the data science programs, especially at the undergraduate level, what they're trying to do is foster this multidisciplinary thing that sort of allows us to kind of go back and forth between kind of places.
Thanks so much. It sounds like it's wide open. I mean, there's a lot that new people, young folks could do with it. So that's really exciting. I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for being here. I wanted to switch gears a little bit and ask about your job as the U.S. Chief of Data Science. How did you land that job and kind of your experiences leading up to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the story of that was, I think which is historical, especially during not only the Obama presidency, but as we've seen in society, is President Obama had really seen, I think through his campaigns and then through the research that was taking place and everything the world was become increasingly reliant on data. In his campaign, he was using data in very novel ways. But then you were starting to watch society as not only social media companies were coming up, but remember, this was a time period when maps were being replaced. Like we used to carry stacks of map, and then it was like, oh no, what we had was MapQuest and other things where we then print out the map directions for MapQuest and those things. And then it was being replaced by the mobile phone. Then you had this device and the maps were on there. The same time you were starting to see companies like Uber and Lyft and people being able to access things. And so there was a shift fundamentally happening. Simultaneously, in the creation of the US CTO role, the role of the first 2 chief data scientists, first Anish Chopra and then Todd Park, the fundamental focus was opening data, and specifically for healthcare. And then as we saw that was happening with healthcare, the question was well, what about research? What about all these other aspects? And then as Megan Smith became the next chief technology officer, the next US CTO, and her focus, her direction from the president was really about how do we actually make sure that we're using technology in a much more broad way, education, making sure we scale these systems inside government, procurement, all these other things. But we couldn't lose out on the data science aspect. Who's going to make sure that portfolio, that focus was there? And so President Obama said, there has to be somebody who's going to advise the president on how to make sure to use data responsibly. And so the mission statement of the chief data scientist has specifically the words responsible in there to ensure that there's responsibility of data and making sure it benefits all Americans. And it's to actually, the full of it is to unleash the power of data to responsibly unleash the power of data to benefit all Americans. And so in that framing of it, they had asked me to say, hey, would I come in and take on this role? And I actually spent my first portion of coming into that role at NIH. I actually spent my first several weeks at NIH working with Francis and the team to really start thinking about how do we get precision medicine off the ground, and then moved over fully to the White House to kind of say, okay, now that we've got NIH as kind of the core mechanism for this, how do we expand this across the federal sector? And so that really kind of was the genesis. And it's similarly, a number of people may have seen on social media, we talked about it because we weren't trying to get a lot of attention for it, but I was CTO and senior staff for the Biden-Harris transition. And one of the things that you'll see in the 100-day and 200-day plans is that heavy emphasis of how do we use technology through everything. That includes the IT modernization efforts that have been put into the American Recovery Plan, but also ensuring that we have surveillance technologies for genomic testing, but also to continue to double down on our R&D portfolios, particularly through NIH. And now Eric Lander is going to be taking this on as the head of OSTP. But you're going to see data and technology wed through all of this. And how important is this, Lindsay? Is remember when we announced precision medicine initially, and President Obama announced it, there was something like $20 million associated with it. And China followed up with $9 billion as their funding component. Now, thanks to 21st Century Cures and the work, many of which was the heavy lifting was done by NIH and HHS on the efforts to get it through Congress, that moved the funding up to $1 billion. But we know that the investment that is taking place and the reason why so many other countries want to go after this fundamentally is because they see the next great set of innovation, the next set of things that are coming is the melding of large scale data sets and also the physical and the wet labs. That combination is where the puck is going to be. Like we're seeing it with the amount of genomics, we're seeing it with the vaccines and everything that we're learning with COVID, we're seeing it everywhere. And so the next great set of innovation is truly going to be this intersection of these places. And that means that we got to have this better hybridization of technology, the wet labs, the physical labs, because we have a lot of small blockers that are preventing us from making this a lot easier for everybody. Right now is too expensive, it is too hard for people to deploy technology on these problems. And it's hard to get data. It's still way too hard to get data in that way from electronic medical records to all the other places. That is still not in an acceptable place. And we're seeing the aspects right now with clinicaltrials.gov to COVID to so many other diseases, rare genomic diseases, other areas. And so it's one of the areas that I'm most bullish on and excited about, honestly.
Awesome, thank you. It's good to hear like the beginning of this big investment in data science and where it's moving hopefully soon. Susan, back to you.
Thanks, Lindsay. This has been great to hear about your experiences, DJ. So I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about what some of your biggest challenges you've faced as the US Chief of Data Science? I know you've talked about it a little bit, but I'd love for you to expand on it some more and possibly even some of your challenges from other roles as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the biggest challenge, honestly, is probably the one that I think many of us all face is, why does anybody take us seriously? Like think about it. Like we kind of have these ideas, and you have to go fight for funding. You have to go fight for somebody to take your idea seriously. And people, it's very easy to double down on the traditional, but it's very hard to get someone to take the radical next step. And I have to applaud Francis Collins for this, of really starting to push NIH to start thinking about data science and being very amenable to kind of saying, hey, what's the next generation of next iteration of this look like? And part of that challenge was, how could data help? And I'll give you a very specific example, criminal justice reform. And so, like the criminal justice reform, you have really great people who are experts in this, the public defenders, community organizers, other activists, other groups. And so there was these meetings at the White House, and people would, they'd let us in because I was a chief data scientist, but they were like, why are you here? Don't you have something better to do? Like, this is not the table for nerds. And this is kind of like that classic data science thing. Is like, well, they're like, okay, well, we could use a smart person here, I guess. But this is not the table you're really supposed to be at. And think about this for the same reason. How many times does that happen? Like one of you's been there and they're like, why are you in this conference? Why are you in this meeting? Like, why are you here? And it's that kind of thing. Now, what happened was, interestingly, there was a blue ribbon task force that was created, and the results of that task force came back. And then as we're sitting around the table, everyone's like, let's look at these assessments, body cameras, data sets on use of force. And they kind of kept going around. They're like, aren't all these technical? Like, guess why I've been in these meetings. and suddenly then people realize, like, wait a second, maybe you do have something of value to add. And one of the things that happened was we got all these police chiefs and technologists and civic activists and political organizers and all these groups together at the White House. And we said, we're going to put them all in a room and lock the door and see what happens and see what they could come up with. And some of the stuff they came up with, they were like, actually, nobody has any data. Well, could we actually create these data sets? So they all got together. They said, what if we committed to opening up these 101 different data sets together and started to see what happened? And because nobody could say, like, hey, how does PG County's police force compare to Montgomery County's, and how does it compare to LA counties or somewhere in Juneau, Alaska? Like, nobody knew. And there were some really fascinating data sets that came out. For example, one that came out was, if you look at stop rates, and they had it by race, and they had them over like the last 20 years, the stop rates actually, they're pretty consistent, Black and white stop rates, at least the way they recorded the data. Pretty good, pretty decent split. But then if you look at the search rate data, and it's Black search rates versus white search rates on the conditional probability, and it's crazy. And people had never just even put that thing. So then the question was, like, who are the officers that contribute to this? Is it the officers as a proxy for, is it in one area or is another? Is it certain beats? What's going on here? And then they sort of started to look at, and this is sort of the natural questions, like we all ask the scientists, is like, what led to this? What's behind this data? And then they found in the case, like they saw, like, oh my gosh, it's like 3 officers that are responsible for all of this. And then they looked at and pulled on that thread, and they saw, hey, these officers, it's actually not because of where they are or where they work. You actually had, in this case, a couple bad apples. And then the chiefs were like, how come I don't have this data? And you're like, who's the person that actually puts this together? Who puts the dashboard together? That's the data scientist. Now, equally as much, there's the police officers who have really, really hard jobs. And so one of the ones that we found in this case was we put a team of data scientists into this police department down in the South, and they were looking at excessive use of force. And this is a very, very locked down data set, because it had so much information. It wasn't a public data set. And they started to look at use of force. And as they started to do just kind of the classic, like, what are the feature sets that provide the lift in the cases of the excessive use of force? There was sort of the first set of features that were all very obvious. Excessive, lots of accidents, lots of complaints, lots of easy signal. But then you kind of go down a little bit further in feature set, and 2 very interesting ones pop out as features. One is that you reported, you've been participant in multiple suicide calls, or you've responded to domestic violence where children are present. And so they've started to the data scientists were like, what's going on? But in this case, and this is one of the most important things, is the data scientists were embedded with the officers. Like they were doing ride-alongs, they were doing everything, they were like really, really embedded. So they had context. And so right away, they knew what had happened. In both those cases of response to suicide and domestic violence where children present, they are both highly emotionally charged events. Very physically messy, dangerous, and just tough situations. And so then if you're not the officer that's just, filing everything, but maybe you're the one that responded, dispatch tells you to get back out on the street. And now you pull somebody over and they're flippant with you and you haven't had that time to really decompress. So it's amazing that we can design software to get you a package from, e-commerce in 2 days. We can get you a car in 5 minutes. We can get you a pizza or food delivered instantly. But we can't have a dispatch system that takes this into account, that can think about these things. So what they did is they started to build that smarter dispatch system, and they've been trying it out and starting to deploy it. Who is that person? That's the data scientist that's doing that. And so I kind of belabor this point through a couple of these stories to really emphasize that the role of being in the room, being at the table when you're in there is one of the most important things. And and that challenge was how do we create better pathways for more people to be at those tables? How do we get our data scientist friends, our colleagues, how do we get one more person along on the journey with us? And it was to break out of our classic bureaucracy and say, look, add another person here, let somebody else help. And that was kind of the singular goal of mine, was to get us to be horizontals, to be accepted, whether it's research and development, whether it's a census, whether it's national security. All these different aspects benefit from us just being able to collaborate more effectively together.
DJ, that's an amazing story about criminal justice reform coming from data science, and you're sitting in on a meeting somewhat unexpectedly. I have another question for you, but I am struck by the importance of sort of mixed modes of data. In other words, what you described was the importance of a qualitative approach as well as quantitative, because you said that it was the ride-alongs that provided an essential ingredient for interpreting what otherwise you might have looked at, why are suicides and domestic violence associated? You still might have been able to design a system to adapt to those, but it wouldn't have generalized to other emotionally charged events too that could help the dispatch. A very, very interesting set of implications. What are some other memorable moments from you being a chief data scientist for the US?
Some of the ones that were the greatest joy was actually being able to hang out with amazing colleagues across the federal government, across the country, and see what people were doing. And many times was to just help kind of say, hey, if you and you work together, this is going to be a heck of a lot more interesting. Cancer Moonshot was a great example of this. It is when then Vice President Biden was mentioning, like he wants to go after this. Well, where's the puck gonna kind of go? Was like, well, why aren't we using technology and data more effectively here? And then it was this kind of question of what would it take to massively accelerate this? And we said, well, we haven't actually brought these efforts together. And I think this is one of our challenges is NIH does what it does phenomenally, but NIH is not a computational superpower in the same way like DOE has historically been. right? Because that's where the supercomputers have been built. That's where we federally allocate dollars, right? NSF does a whole lot on algorithms. That's where that's been. So what would it look like if we started to blend that more efficiently together? It's not like NIH can't work on algorithms, but what if we started to make this more hybridized? What if we brought in the best from NASA and different technologies to do things? And what I think we found in all of these efforts, these big ticket projects, especially with President Obama, was you need to really start to bring a more multidisciplinary approach. And by the way, this was definitely true for me during when I served in the Bush administration as well, around post 9/11, was as we were trying to figure out many of these ideas around national security, it wasn't like these ideas existed in traditional national security apparatus. A lot of these ideas came from other places, other ideas, other disciplines. And we said, what if we brought these in and use these techniques? Would that be more efficient? Would that be more effective? And the answer is massively so, massively. And so it was kind of being in there. Maybe, like some of the other ones that I think were very special moments for me personally were, which may seem a little strange from a data scientist, was actually making sure we tell the stories of real people and using that as our opening, if you will, to allow deeper research for work to take place. And some of the ones that is there's a cellist, Zoe Keating, and some of you may know her for her work. She's a phenomenal cellist. Her husband died of brain cancer, glioblastoma, and like so many of hers, she just couldn't get the electronic medical records, and so she was trying to get care for him and was going around from institution after institution after institution, and was just getting the runaround for very, very basic things. Now, she happens to be really good at data and she's really fast at typing. So she transcribed all of her notes. And so she walked me through her experience. Now, turns out her experience is the exact same one Beau Biden went through. And I remember literally sitting in the kitchen at the vice president's residence one time, and we were kind of talking about the cancer moonshot, and he couldn't believe that other people were facing the same problem that Beau, his son, was facing as they were trying to get his medical records between DC and Delaware to just get the same kind of treatment. And so you had the vice president's son having the same issue that Zoe Keating's husband was facing, and so many others. And that's really what then helped kick off part of that discussion with, for how do we actually massively start to use the electronic medical records for efforts like precision medicine. They had to be the foundational aspect of it. But and one of the things I would just encourage all of you to remember is that, and this is why I say it all the time, is the data points have names. The data points have names, and we have to remember those names and tell their stories. That's one of the most important things. One of the really big ass kickings that I had from President Obama, which is not an ass kicking that you really want, was during precision medicine, he said, hey, it was very clear-cut order of making sure that people who are going to be impacted by this program have a say in the design of the program. And so we went out and we said, yes, we have the groups from cystic fibrosis, the community, we have this group, we have this group, we have this group. And he kept saying, that's the group that's represented. Do you have the actual people? And we thought about it and we're like, no, sir, we need to do a better job here. And so we went and started to get those people. And one of the ones that we had is, so I recall, we had a big science conference out at University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. And we kind of had a lot of groups there. And one of the ones that we did is we had a round table on precision medicine with the local communities, the Hispanic community, the Black community, researchers, others there. And we had a big long room and everyone, and Stephanie Devaney, Francis Collins, myself were there, a number of others. And we kind of were listening to everybody go around. And we go around, and then there's this kind of, everyone has spoken, given us their input. There's this elderly Black woman in the corner. And I remember saying, ma'am, we haven't heard from you. Love your opinion. She's like, do you really want my opinion? What do you say to that? Yes, ma'am. Really want to know. And oh my gosh, did she let us have it? Wow, did she tear into us? She's like, have you thought about this? You haven't thought about this? You haven't done this? What about this? What about this? What about this for the community? I remember like walking out of that room with Francis and saying, she just crushed us. And I thought, can we hire her? Like, she just gave us a playbook. She just literally gave us a playbook of what we need to do properly to engage the community. Otherwise, those data points aren't going to be, we're not going to get those data points. We're not going to have representation. We are going to fail on the mission. And I just emphasize, like, you have to get into the community. You have to get out of your comfort zone, get out of the office, get out of the lab, and meet with those people, because that's where the insights truly going to come from. Person's book that we read, a lot of us read, Atul Gawande. If you kind of think about what he really does, what he does best at the end of the day, and I've seen Atul do this, especially around COVID, is you got to meet and talk to the people. And that's where you get the glimmer of insight that you then can carry forward.
Thanks very much. Roger, I think you're next.
Francis would be like, you can't tell all these stories.
They're good stories. You haven't. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So perhaps negative examples are as effective as positive examples. So what is some of the worst and best career advice that you've received along the way?
Yeah. So one of the most powerful, one of the things I need to emphasize is I've had catastrophic failures. I think some people don't know, I had a $41 million company that failed because we were building a photo sharing app. Kid you not. And people thought my career was dead. People really thought my career was dead. I remember, people being like, with that kind of failure in Silicon Valley, you're done. One of the most important lessons I learned with that is, if you are constantly finding a way to help somebody, an approach of constantly creating more than you take, people will help you out. People will help you out massively in phenomenal ways. They'll give you a second chance, a third chance to try to do more things. And it's one of the reasons I emphasize collaboration, is because if I didn't have those collaborative experiences, I think my career would have tanked at that point. I would have had a really tough time. The other one that I emphasize is, from a career planning perspective, what are the skills you need? One of the ones I went to after I was early on at eBay and early in my tenure at eBay, and I had some pretty good wins. And I kind of went to this VC and I said, hey, I'd like to be part of an early stage team, and I would like to work on these things. And he kind of was like, why would I ever give you that shot? You haven't had a proven track record of building things. You haven't had a proven track record of building teams. You haven't had a proven track record of raising funding, all these different things. And, one side you could take that as an ass kicking. The other side, you can look at it and be like, oh, that's the check boxes. Those are all the check boxes. That's the things I need to do. Great. Now I've got a roadmap and I can go do those things. The other part I would say career failure that that is there is one of the things that people don't realize is like, oh, like I just went from, you know, being an academic to going to government to industry. Those were very hard. I don't want to make it seem like I just jumped in and it was like easy. It was excruciatingly difficult. The first from Maryland to the government, part of that was after 9/11, but second of part of the reason I went in was in the Bush administration, our budgets were just getting crushed from a scientific perspective. And so because of that, I wasn't going to be able to fund the team in a way that needed to be funded. So we're going to run out of classic research problems, being able to support them. Going into from government and going back to the University of Maryland and deciding to leave for industry, took me 6 months to get my job, to get my first job, for someone to take a chance on me. 6 months of pounding the pavement, no one taking a shot. And by the way, Sergey Brin, the founder of Google, his dad was on my thesis committee. His mom was on research grants with me. And I still couldn't get a job at Google. The way I got my job, and this is definitely a story of privilege, is my mom happened to be at a cocktail party with the president of Skype at the time, Rajiv Dutta, and she harassed him so much to take a call with me that I actually was able to get on a call with him. And then he's like, oh, you seem smart. Maybe we should see if you want to interview at eBay. That's how I ended up at eBay. Later on, people were like, oh, you're actually you can benefit things here in Silicon Valley only because somebody was able to take a chance on me. And so what I translate that into for all of us, because I had that opportunity of privilege, is how do we use our respective privileges to create an opportunity for another person? What would it look like if you gave just a little bit of time to help somebody else in need? What if you just took a chance on somebody? Because none of us got to where we are without somebody taking a shot on me, on us. And I certainly didn't get to where I was without lots of different people taking a shot at me. And I think that was, whether it was this idea of having this rebooting LinkedIn as a data company, whether it was that the idea that the chief data scientist should work on criminal justice issues, whether it should be that any of these things. And so my ask is, let's push ourselves, let's challenge ourselves to open the door for somebody that may not have a chance that we may have had, or the chance that we wish we had.
Hi, GJ, this is Albert again. I just want to follow up on your last point, actually. So from the other perspective, right, I think what you said is so true. We have to give back. But let's say there's those early, career students, undergrads, high school students out there who aren't from Silicon Valley or Bethesda or the Montgomery corridor. What can they do? What advice can you give them? We're always looking at ways to reach out to the community. And Dr. Volkoff, this is really high on her radar. How do we reach out to the community to give them a chance? What advice can you give them to get involved with data science? And the follow-up question to that, because we're running short on time, is what do students do during the pandemic to best position themselves, to get more involved with data science? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thank you for asking this question. So the first is, at the high school level, the collegiate level, I think the models, the two models I often point to are the Montgomery County, Montgomery Blair High School, the Fairfax County schools, and some of the Silicon Valley schools. I think those are the high watermarks of our school system, because as students, it's very easy for us to reach out and let one of them into our labs or have internships and all of those different aspects. I think the data science space is actually some of the most amenable, because you can just label data as an intern and just start to get used to stuff and play with stuff where your coding skills don't have to necessarily be up to par, or you can plug things and wire stuff together in packages. What I think is the challenge is, how do we reach beyond our local communities? How do we reach to communities that don't have that access, that are around the country, and be able to do things? And I think that we need to start figuring out and be clever about new ways to do it, because as we found with the pandemic, is there are ways to do this a little bit more virtually. There are ways that we can start to do these things, but we honestly need some of the programs that bring these students into us. And I think we've all had that moment where one of us got to be in a lab or around somebody that changed our trajectory. You know, for me, it was, you know, doing early PCR experiments in high school because because my grades weren't good. I wasn't supposed to be the kid that was allowed to go to the lab, but I talked my way into the field trip. And I got to do this PCR like kind of, you know, lab experiment, and it changed my thinking on so many different levels. But the reason I kind of talked my way is one teacher was like, well, if this guy is this passionate about doing this, grades be damned. Let's let him into the program anyway and see what he does. And then that same physics teacher, because even though my grades didn't qualify, she gave me a ton of scientific equipment to take home. And she just said, return it at the end of the year. And so I built a little mini lab where I was reproducing Edgar Tim's photography experiments on my own at home. And so what does it look like to do a version of that for kids? I don't know. I don't know, honestly, but my challenge to us is like, let's go figure it out together. And I think if we do, we're going to do that. You know, in terms of the pandemic, some of the things that I think are really powerful is because there's so much open data, you just get to play with it. Like what I've been telling students is like, and now this is kind of shut down, but like before I was like, oh, there's a COVID tracking project. Go join the COVID tracking project. Like think about, because we have had such a collapse of our infrastructure of our federal layer during COVID, we have seen the rise of the data scientists and citizen scientists jumping in to COVID to fill those gaps. COVID tracking project, COVID Act Now, different modeling efforts, different ways of playing, some of them good, some of them bad, but all creative, And you can just get in there and start playing. And that is how I think stuff is. The models that were built for the assessment of California were built and put in open source into Amazon servers. And so anybody could take that code and build and play on it. And I would love to see more of that as what's happening, and us to think about, well, what could we open up? What could we put out there? But then we have to get the word out. You have to get advocacy. It's not okay just to say, oh, it's a website. You got to do a little bit more of saying, come work on this, or here's examples or ideas, and then it'll carry forward.
Thank you.
Awesome. I know we're running short on time, but I wanted to follow up with another question about COVID. So looking back at the beginning, how could we have used data science or AI to better predict the growth? And then looking forward, what lessons can we take away from this, and how can we apply data science looking forward to whatever's kind of coming our way next?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So the first lesson is when COVID was starting, the models were toy models. Like, all of us know the SEIR models and all these other different types, but they were not okay or have the ability to really help policymakers. So very quickly, you had this model and you'd go like, look at this exponential growth, right? But then you'd ask one more question and then you couldn't answer that. Many times the granularity of the models did not support the type of questions we want. So like you could have this model for Connecticut and that same model is being used for California. But given the geographic size, there was no, like, what does transport look like? It did not take into account how the different community structures are there. And so what did it look like to take kind of a toy weather model and graduate it to the National Weather Service? This is one of the reasons why we've called for a National Disease Forecasting Center, like at that level of sophistication. We now need to get the infrastructure in place. Some of the concrete things that we need to do for COVID is we need to do the deep dive postmortem lessons learned that we saw, and what is the infrastructure we want in place. We still need to get massive genomic surveillance in place, whether it's static testing, randomized testing, wastewater, don't care, all of it. Check box, all of it, please. And then who's going to collect that data? Great, it's going into at least to CDC. Let's make sure it's opened up. But how do we do more? We need to start connecting that with other aspects. We still barely understand the aspects of mental health issues with regards to what COVID has done.
What has this done with aspects of other forms of addiction? We're just beginning to scratch the surface. Why aren't we asking those very specific questions right now? I know all of this community is, but where are other people asking that? And how are we actually making it tangible? Those things need to come together, not just because COVID, we're only at the halfway time. We got a long way to go before we're through this. And then we got the next coronavirus coming, and this is still not pandemic flu. So I look at this as what we've seen right now as the very tip of the iceberg of what we should have done 20 years ago to start putting in place. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm emphasizing that to say that what we should be really looking at, and what I'd love for NIDA to be a champion of, and all of us to be a champion of, is advocacy of what the country needs to do for us to put the right infrastructure in place so that we can actually build off of that and kind of look back in 5-10 years and be like, whew, thank goodness we put that in place. Because and boy, was that hard lifting, but wow, did we learn so much more? Did we help change the trajectory because of one small thing? And I just want to emphasize this. Change at the federal, national level that is scalable doesn't always have to happen because of a big bang project. The fact that we have organ donations the way we do is literally because a couple people got this tiny little bit of thing in there that said it should be done at the DMV. And so little things can have profound scalable impact given from the perch that we all occupy.
I believe Dr. Volkow has a comment.
Yes, DJ, thanks for a really terrific talk and dialogue. And I had asked you the question on the COVID because as we look forward, I mean, you want to learn from history, and I guess that we didn't have the models or all of the data that we wanted, but still there was data, and yet we neglected it. And I think that in terms of your question is how do we poise ourselves, because we have a responsibility in terms of bringing forward what we think are issues that we cannot afford to ignore or neglect. And in our case, it's of course the epidemic of overdose deaths that we're observing and for which we actually don't have accurate data. So this has been very frustrating. But in more general terms, as I think, and I would love to hear your perspective, it just strikes me, and you say it doesn't need to be these well-organized programs or projects. And one of the most valuable things that I've seen emerge is the science, citizen science. And yet one of the infrastructures that will allow us as a country advance much faster, and we don't have, is an internet access to everyone in the United States. So my questions to you, because again, is what solutions do we bring forward? How would you go about this? What is your thinking on how to make this possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the infrastructure of the internet is, COVID has exposed how bad the digital divide is. You know, and one of the most painful, I spent the first 100+ days of a year ago working on the California COVID response. And, you know, some of the things that kind of came up were a lot of people brought up technical solutions that really only benefited one portion of the community. You know, the exposure notification apps. These were fundamentally not going to be effective for large parts of the population because they don't have devices that are the most up to date. There's surveillance questions. There's all sorts of things that people hadn't thought about. And one of the takeaways that I realized that I personally took away is that many people who work on technology haven't really lived in the communities that are most impacted by these aspects. You know, and I talked to a lot of technologist friends who are from, you know, the classic Apple and Googles and Amazons, all the big companies. And I said, oh, great, like, let's suppose we have an exposure notification, but they live in a multi-generational household or they're migrant workers. Who's going to pay for them to isolate? Like what, like you pull on it a little bit, you're like, this collapses, right? Like what's the next level of answer? And so that needs to be a holistic policy process and problem, The other one, which is there, and it sounds trivial, like I spent a good chunk of my time building data dictionaries. Because we got all this data coming in, there was no data dictionary, so nobody would use the data. And so there's a lot of this very simple stuff that isn't there. The digital divide one that you're pointing out that I think was the most problematic is on education. And the aspects of this is like people just don't have access to the internet. I think we spent a lot of our policy time, actually this goes back to Clinton's initial initiatives on trying to wire schools. But what we found is like wiring schools, you got to wire people wherever they're going to be. And I think that cellular connectivity, other aspects are showing that their promise is there. But I think we need to really ask ourselves what is this going to look like over the next decade? Because the technologies are about to shift quite a bit. And what we need is actually a much bigger plan. And the model that I actually think is the best is what does it mean to wire and connect tribal lands? If we can figure out how to wire tribal lands, we're going to figure this out. Now, why am I not giving a concrete proposal? Is honestly because I think we need to take an approach that we call scout and scale. Is that we need to deploy funds and for a number of experiments to take place around the country, figure out which ones are working, take the best of them within a span of 3 years, and then figure out based on that, what is the scalable approach that needs to be deployed across the country. Because if we try to say, just here's how from the top down approach and figure it out, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but this is the classic, like we just kind of come down from the top and then the local community is like, that's not going to work for ours. And so we need to actually make this a little bit more organic, but kind of make the soil more fertile for the experiments to take place and then figure out what's going to take action and to be effective.
And so how can we help as an agency? Because and I also think that, I completely agree that you want to do these sort of, in a way, large pilot projects that will allow us to understand what works the best, because there's not going to be one solution. But how do we start? How do we contribute for that to happen? Because this is at the essence, on the one hand, as you say, education, but also for being able to obtain data. And so it's like the soil from which data science can really blossom. Yeah,
so thanks for bringing this up. So the very genuine answer is we have to become better communicators. I think we're really good at communicating oftentimes to our peers and our colleagues. We are not effective at the level we need to be with society and broader policy makers. So what does that translate into? It actually is communicating in more novel methods. And what I mean by that is not journal articles. And I'm not saying at all, like, get rid of journal. This is an and conversation. It is how do we, whether it's writing books, doing podcasts, blog posts, TikToks, Twitter, I don't know. We have to try a much bigger approach for actually engaging the public, helping them. We need to give them stories. We need to help them see why this is important, help them advocate, write op-eds, do all these things. And some of this feels, and it feels weird because we're also, as you know, for those especially that are civil servants in the career force, there's challenges with that. There are real challenges with that. I don't want to dismiss that, but we have to get out there. And I think Francis actually is a role model on this of being out there and communicating, but we need, Tony is too, Tony Fauci, but more, we need more of that communication. We need to engage, and NIH is really good at this. I need y'all to engage more with the Hill and also state leadership. We forget. We need to find a way to engage with the governors and the mayors. And that communication, once we start to do that, the dialogue will follow. I have found almost always when we do a little bit of that storytelling, you open a door and you start to get advocates that start carrying us in a different methodology that allows us to engage with the public. And the place where we see that the most, and if you kind of look at these stories over time, whether it's cancer or anything, other things, I have come to believe that is the community organizing efforts that make the messaging to be more effective for dispersal of ideas.
Thanks. And I think that I was looking at, you just have 3 minutes, but another aspect that we have been, all of us sensitized, has been the whole notion of the health disparities, which drives on into socioeconomical differences. Poor education is a fundamental in all of these distinctions, and as and made so very clear with COVID. But if you think about it, with access to the internet and with all of the advances in technology that have developed with COVID to communicate with one another, we now have the opportunity of providing high quality education to everyone. It will be a challenge to create programs that are actually going to be salient for children and keep their attention. But if we can do it for entertainment, we can do it for education. And so we have the means, right, to modify these terrible health disparities. And again, I think that the way what you're saying is we need to communicate better and to basically help guide the points about why this is so fundamental, to be able to provide everyone with this access to communicating, obtaining data, obtaining information, and being part of those that giving information. So I got the message, but I think thanks you very much. It has been terrific having you, and we would love to steal your brain because we're always trying to figure out how to get these things going. And as you sort of say, at the essence of data science is obtaining data from very different perspectives, and you have given us a very novel and unique one.
Yeah, let me just maybe close with this, which is, first part is the project that I didn't have time to run through at the White House, which is the one I wish we had kind of started with, which is actually the issue of poverty. Whether it's data on evictions, which doesn't exist, there's no real good data on evictions, criminal justice, they all kind of are around the whole idea of poverty and what is the impact of that, health disparities. You've kind of seen it, the classic Raj Chetty work, others. There's so much federal data, so much state, city data that could be opened up, pulled together, that would give us phenomenal insights on these different disparities. And what would that start to look like, and especially if it was funded appropriately? It's been funded by philanthropic efforts, Arnold Foundation, others, Gates, but that's not sufficient and it's not sustainable. And we need that level of funding to be put in place. Gun violence is in there as well. The other part I think of this is, I just want to say thank you to all of you. One of the things I think that is important to call out is, with the data science skills, you can pretty much go do anything you want, but you're choosing to do this. And in my opinion, there is no more noble profession than the ones that you all are on. Being able to work with NIH, being able to work on this mission, you fundamentally are at the helm of where the nation is going on the most important issues of our day. And what you have the ability to do, what your charter is, what your mission is the thing that I think when the country doesn't always appreciate, doesn't always get to see until much later. And they often, when they don't have it, Secretary Carter used to say, still says, is security is like air. You only know you need it when you don't have it. And that's been exposed during COVID. And so I think you all are the air, you're the oxygen for our society, for what our kids are going to need. And so I just want to express my gratitude and thanks for what you all do.
Thank you so much, DJ. This has been amazing talking to you and hearing all about your career and hearing your insights. And I think it's great for us to kind of learn how we can use these insights to bring more data science to addiction research. So we really appreciate your time. And I want to thank the audience as well. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get to all the questions. I think some of them were kind of touched on in some of the previous questions. And I also want to thank again the team that helped organize this and the technical team. And we do have another seminar next Monday at 9 a.m. The slide is going up. We have Kirk Bourne from Booz Allen and Martin Paulus from the Laureate Brain Institute. So I hope you'll tune in, and information on the next 2 seminars after that will be coming. So thanks again for your attention, and this recording will be made available soon. Bye, everyone.